The nationally televised sudden cardiac arrest of NFL football player Damar Hamlin in January of this year was the first time in recent memory that sudden cardiac arrest entered the national consciousness. Sudden cardiac arrest. It even sounds like something that only happens in dramatic and extraordinary circumstances. Even after this event, myself, and I think most people, still considered sudden cardiac arrest to be something akin to getting struck by lightning. Something you hear about often enough to know it exists, but it's still so rare you could never imagine it happening to you or to your child. On February 24th, just 52 days later, my perfectly healthy 16-year-old son went into sudden cardiac arrest while sitting at his desk at school. Sudden cardiac arrest is the third leading cause of natural death in the United States. It kills nearly 400,000 Americans annually. That is more than car accidents and breast cancer combined. And yet, shockingly, life-saving devices like AEDs and CPR training are not mandatory in many schools nationwide. Did you know that? I certainly didn't know that. And it's a rhetorical question anyway, because as I've learned since this became a part of my reality, most people have no idea. And when they find out, they're generally as shocked as I was to learn that AEDs are not federally mandated in schools or anywhere, really. It is so unusual that we do not talk about or prepare for sudden cardiac arrest given its frequency of occurrence. We already do this for other unfortunate tragedies. The best example I can think of, accidental fires. We know we cannot predict or prevent accidental fires, and so we have mandated that smoke detectors and fire extinguishers are accessible in places where people gather. We take it very seriously. We ask businesses and schools to conduct regular fire drills. Why is it so easy for us to accept that risk, but there are schools who don't have AEDs? Even though a school district is statistically more likely to have a student go into sudden cardiac arrest than they are to have a fire in the building, you will find a fire extinguisher in the building in all 52 states. In only 20 states is there required to be an AED. 20 states. Out-of-hospital sudden cardiac arrest has a fatality rate of 90%. Little did I know when I got that phone call, my precious son had only a 10% chance of survival. I'll never forget the phone call that made the world stop. It was a police officer telling me my son had collapsed in class, was unresponsive and being transported to the hospital by ambulance. I was out of town at the time, over an hour away. No one could tell me anything. I remember screaming, "Is he alive?" And the police officer saying, "Ma'am, all I can tell you right now is that he is unresponsive." When I finally got to the hospital, doctors told me my son had suffered sudden cardiac arrest. We were floored. It did not seem possible to me in any way that my healthy child had gone into cardiac arrest while sitting at his desk at school. But that is exactly what happened. The school staff saved my son's life. No question. We were so lucky. Every single person who witnessed his arrest did exactly the right thing. The school nurse, when she began CPR, he had been unresponsive and without oxygen for 3 minutes. Now, I thought my family had been struck by lightning. Statistically, when my son went into sudden cardiac arrest. But in reality, the lightning struck during his recovery. My son regained full consciousness just hours after his sudden cardiac arrest and passed all of his neurological exams. He was up and moving the next day, never had to be intubated. It wasn't probably until that moment that I realized how lucky we had really been. He had been so close to death. Now, 5 days after his sudden cardiac arrest, doctors implanted a device inside of him called an implantable cardioverter defibrillator, or ICD. 6 days after his sudden cardiac arrest, we were discharged from the hospital and he walked to the car on his own. 12 days after his sudden cardiac arrest, he was on stage at his high school starring in their production of The Wizard of Oz. It was amazing. It's amazing. Now, 3 minutes without oxygen is a long time. And it is the time in oxygen deprivation where neurons suffer more extensive damage and lasting brain damage becomes likely. At 4 minutes, permanent brain damage occurs, and at 5 minutes, brain death is imminent. Now, I recently spoke to the mother of another sudden cardiac arrest survivor whose child's story was identical to mine. Our children were the same age. They were in similar settings, seated, not doing anything physical, without oxygen for 3 minutes. Both required 2 shocks from a defibrillator to be resuscitated. Unlike my son, their child spent 30 days in the intensive care unit, intubated, and another 4 months in the hospital in rehabilitation. Again, I thought the lightning hit when he had sudden cardiac arrest, but the lightning strike was the fact that he was on stage 12 days after his heart stopped. Now, sudden cardiac arrest is an insidious, silent killer in our community. And no one is talking about it, and nobody can figure out why. Now, I am not an expert, but I have a guess based on my experience as the mother of a survivor who has witnessed the reactions of hundreds of people to this story. Sudden cardiac arrest as a concept is just too scary for most people, especially parents. You know, it's always very obvious to me when I'm telling this story to parents that they are waiting for me to get to the part where I explain how and why this happened to my son. And I get it. You want to protect your children. I can see the question that you don't ask written all over your face, and it's, what can I do to make sure this doesn't happen to me? And the answer to that is the reason I'm standing before you tonight. The answer is nothing. There is nothing anyone can do to prevent or predict sudden cardiac arrest or to protect anyone from having it happen to them. There is no predictive tests. There are no indicators. My son had a clean EKG and echocardiogram in the emergency room hours after his sudden cardiac arrest. He has been tested for every congenital, environmental, and genetic anomaly it is possible to test for, and we still have no answers. A staggeringly high percentage of sudden cardiac arrest survivors are never given a definitive cause for their arrest. We cannot predict or prevent sudden cardiac arrest. So what can we do? We can accept that it's a risk. We can be prepared to take action, and we can start talking about it. The chances of survival of out-of-hospital sudden cardiac arrest are just 10%. But if CPR is administered within the first 3 minutes of collapse, those chances immediately jump to 30%. If CPR plus a shock from a defibrillator is administered within the first 3 minutes of collapse, the chances jump to 50 to 75%. Now I know what you're thinking. You are thinking that obviously, because this is publicly available information, more people must know about it. You are thinking that regardless of government regulations, of course, most school districts and businesses and community centers have AEDs, because why wouldn't you? Why wouldn't you? That is the question that we must ask our school districts, our local businesses, our friends and neighbors. Every time there's a very public occurrence of sudden cardiac arrest, there's always a flurry of effort. And it seems to die down as quickly as it begins once people start to wrap their brains around the magnitude of the problem. It is difficult to accept that there is no prediction, there is no prevention, there is no peace of mind. It is so much easier to stick your head back in the sand and convince yourself it will never happen to you. Believe me, I know. But our fear and discomfort to discuss this has to stop, because I cannot imagine going through what I went through with my son and then not being able to bring him home at the end of it all because his school didn't have an AED. And yet that is the reality for 90% of parents in this scenario. Get CPR certified, I beg you, and check your children's schools, your churches, your workplaces. Make sure they have an AED, and if they don't, ask them why. These two simple actions can and will create a ripple wave of action and accountability in our community. And finally, and most importantly, please, I beg you, please start talking about sudden cardiac arrest. Spread your new awareness. If every person in this room tonight commits to educating 2 more people about this, we have already sparked change. We may not be able to fix this perception issue today or even tomorrow, but if each of us commit to educating our corner of the world and asking others to do the same, we will save lives. Thank you.